It was the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. The kind that made you feel like you were always on the edge of hearing something, but never quite catching it. A deep silence wrapped around the house like a heavy fog, swallowing every sound, even the faintest creaks of the floorboards, the rush of wind outside the cracked windows. I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the old photograph in my hand, wondering if this place would ever feel like home again. The house had been my family's for generations, a sprawling Victorian that stood on the edge of a small town. The kind of place that people would avoid when they passed by, eyes darting away from the broken windows and overgrown garden. It was a beautiful house once, full of life and laughter. Now, it was just a hollow shell, echoing with the ghosts of everything that had been lost. The house was supposed to have been sold by now, but something about the place kept pulling me back, kept me from leaving. I couldn't explain it. The photograph I was holding was taken years ago, back when everything seemed normal. It was of my family, Mom, Dad, my little sister Emily, and me. We were all smiles, gathered around the kitchen table, hands piled high with freshly baked cookies. In the background, you could barely see the faded wallpaper, the chipped edges of the cabinets. It looked like a different world back then. I used to look at the picture and feel a sense of comfort, but now it made my stomach churn. I had returned to this place to settle some unfinished business, but every night I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just the feeling of being alone in an old, decaying house, it was something else, something heavier. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers, just out of reach. Other times, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision. But when I turned to look, nothing was there. It had all started with the letter. I found it in the mail one day, buried beneath bills and junk. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with age. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. When I opened it, a single piece of paper fell out, the words typed in a blocky font that seemed strangely out of place. It was short and to the point. Don't let them forget. That was it. No signature, no explanation. Just those 5 words. I hadn't known what to make of it at first. But something about it gnawed at me. My first instinct was to ignore it, pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did they mean? Who was it from? And what was I supposed to do with it? A few days later, I made the decision to return to the house. Maybe there was something here, some clue, some unfinished piece of the puzzle, that could explain the strange letter. Or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Either way, I needed answers. As I arrived back in the town, the memories hit me all at once. The long walks through the woods with Emily, the sounds of our laughter echoing through the trees. The games we used to play in the yard, the smell of Mom's cooking wafting from the kitchen, the way Dad used to hum while tinkering with old tools in the garage. It all felt so far away now. Everything had changed. I pulled up to the house, the tires of my old car crunching against the gravel driveway. The house loomed in front of me, a dark silhouette against the overcast sky. The shutters were broken, the paint peeling off in long strips. The front door hung slightly ajar, like it had been waiting for me. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever I would find inside. I stepped through the doorway, the wood groaning beneath my feet. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. The walls were covered in a thick layer of dust, the furniture draped in white sheets. It was eerily quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old house settling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I wandered through the rooms, moving slowly, taking in the remnants of a life that had once been here. The hallway was long and narrow, the hardwood floors warped with age. The kitchen, where that picture had been taken, was just as I remembered it, old-fashioned, with yellowing tiles and a rusted refrigerator. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn shut, and the fireplace cold and empty. I made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The second floor was no better, more dust, more broken furniture, more forgotten memories. But then I saw it. The door at the end of the hall. It was different from the others. For one thing, it was closed. Most of the doors in the house had been left open, like they had been abandoned in a hurry. But not this one. It was shut tight, and something about it called to me. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to go in. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It felt colder here, the air thicker. My heart was pounding in my chest. But I couldn't turn back now. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the patterns faded and worn. The floor was covered in thick dust, but there were no signs of the usual neglect. No broken furniture or cobwebs. In fact, the room looked almost untouched. The strangest part. There was a single item in the center of the room, a wooden box, resting on the floor. It wasn't much, just an old, weathered box, but it felt like it had been waiting for me. I knelt down and opened it. Inside was a stack of old papers, documents, letters, photographs, all related to my family. Some of them I recognized, but others were new, things I had never seen before. As I sifted through the papers, I came across a letter that made my blood run cold. It was dated just before my parents died, just before everything changed. The letter was from a man named Vincent, a name I had never heard before. His handwriting was hurried, frantic. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was never supposed to end like this. But if they come for you, there's nothing I can do to protect you. You have to leave. You have to get out before they find you." I stared at the words, feeling a chill run down my spine. What was this about? And who was Vincent? The door slammed behind me that I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The door to the small room had been wide open just moments ago, but now it was shut tight. I could hear the sound of my breath, shallow and erratic in the thick, oppressive silence. My mind raced, was I imagining things? Or was there something in this house, something I couldn't quite explain, that was making me see things that weren't there? I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the air around me heavy with something I couldn't put my finger on. The house seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for me to do something, anything. I approached the door slowly, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. The wood was cold beneath my fingers, the room on the other side completely still. I turned the handle and pushed. The door swung open easily, the creaking sound echoing in the otherwise quiet house. It was the same room. The box was still there, sitting innocently in the middle of the floor. Nothing had changed. I stepped back, looking over my shoulder, trying to steady my pulse. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the wind had slammed the door shut, or maybe, just maybe, this place was playing tricks on me. But then why did it feel like something was watching me? Why did I feel like I wasn't alone? The letter still sat in my hand. The words, "You have to leave," seemed to burn in my mind. Vincent. Who was he? And why had he written this? If this was truly from my family's past, from a time before things had gone wrong, what had happened to change everything? And what was the danger that was mentioned? What was it that had forced my family to run, to hide? I felt my pulse quicken again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, a drive, an instinct to uncover the truth. I couldn't leave now. Whatever this house was hiding, whatever it had been trying to keep buried, I had to know. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. The letter said I had to leave. But what if leaving wasn't the answer? What if the answer was here, inside these walls? I took the papers from the box and stuffed them into my jacket pocket, my eyes scanning the room once more. The photograph on the wall, the creaking floorboards, the remnants of life long gone, it all felt suffocating, like it was closing in on me. Something wasn't right about this place. Something was waiting. The air grew colder, and I shivered involuntarily, even though the house was far from cold. I felt a weight on my chest, something heavy and pressing, like a hand around my throat. I could almost hear the whispers again, soft and unintelligible, as if coming from the walls themselves. They were louder now, like they were getting closer. I backed out of the room, stepping carefully over the dusty floor. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something had shifted. The house felt different, like it was more alive than before, like it had been waiting for me to find the box and open it. I returned to the hallway, my eyes darting around, half expecting something to jump out at me from the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. Just the same dark, decaying house. I needed to get out of here. I turned toward the stairs, but before I could take another step, I heard it. A sound from behind me, faint but unmistakable. The soft shuffle of footsteps on the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I turned, my heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. I had no idea how long I stood there, just staring into the darkness, too afraid to move. My body was frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out of this house and never look back. But my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't leave, not yet. Not without answers. I gripped the banister of the stairs, the wood rough and cold beneath my fingers. My head was spinning. My eyes darted back and forth, trying to make sense of everything. There had to be an explanation for all of this. The letter, the strange sounds, the feeling of being watched, it was all connected. But how? Then I remembered the photograph. The family photo, the one from years ago, the one that had been taken right before everything fell apart. I could still picture it in my mind, the smiling faces of my parents, the happiness that seemed so real, so solid. But there was one thing that bothered me now, something I hadn't noticed until just recently. Emily. My sister. She was standing beside Mom, smiling just like the rest of us, but her eyes were different. There was something off about them, something that I couldn't place back then. Now, though, I could see it clearly. She wasn't smiling the way she should have been. It was more of a forced smile, a look in her eyes like she knew something, like she was hiding something. I had to see her again. But when I turned to leave the house, the front door slammed shut, so hard that the entire frame rattled that I froze, my blood running cold. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, louder than any noise I'd heard since I'd entered. I spun around to face the entrance, but it was useless. The door was shut tight, the wooden frame splintered from the force of the blow. I rushed forward, my heart hammering in my chest, and yanked on the handle. It wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into it, desperation taking over, but it didn't move. Panic rose in my throat. The house had always felt heavy, like it was alive, but now it felt suffocating, like it was closing in on me. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't even get to the door. I stumbled back, taking in the dark hallway around me. The air felt thick, colder now, like it was filled with something else, something I couldn't explain. My eyes darted around, looking for an exit, but the house seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in tighter. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. Then I heard it. A whisper. At first it was faint, so soft that I thought it might just be the wind or the old house groaning under its own weight. But then it came again, louder this time, almost like a voice. I turned quickly, looking for the source, but all I could see was shadow. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and then I heard it clearly. Emily. I froze, the blood draining from my face. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the whispers now. The house seemed to hum with the sound, vibrating with a strange energy. The floor beneath my feet felt unstable, like it was shifting, warping, bending to some unseen force. The voices were growing stronger, more urgent. Emily, don't you see? Another voice hissed. I turned in every direction, but I couldn't locate where it was coming from. The voices seemed to be all around me, circling me, closing in. I stumbled backward toward the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me. I needed to get to the second floor. There had to be something up there, some answer, something that would explain what was happening. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I rushed up the stairs, my feet slipping on the old wooden steps. The house felt like it was shifting under me, groaning like it was alive. The whispers didn't stop, they only grew louder as I reached the top of the stairs. Every step I took made the voices grow, until they were a deafening chorus in my ears. I couldn't breathe. I could barely think. I raced down the hallway, heading for the room at the end. The one that had been locked. But when I reached it, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door was wide open. I swallowed hard, my stomach turning as I stepped inside. The room looked the same as it had before, small, dusty, with peeling wallpaper and a cold, lifeless air. But now, the atmosphere felt different. It was heavier, charged with something dark, something angry. I didn't know what I expected to find, but this wasn't it. The walls, which had once seemed so plain, now looked twisted. The shadows on them were alive, writhing, shifting. They weren't just shadows, they were forms, shapes moving with a mind of their own. There was a low, vibrating hum in the room, almost like a growl, and I could feel it deep in my chest. And then, I saw it. The box. The same wooden box, but now it was different. It wasn't sitting innocently on the floor anymore. It was open. And inside. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Inside the box was a photograph, and on the back of the photo, written in the same frantic handwriting as Vincent's letter, were the words. "You were never meant to leave." It was a photo of my sister Emily. But it wasn't the Emily I remembered. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glassy, and she was staring straight at the camera. But what made my stomach churn wasn't just her expression, it was the fact that someone else was in the picture, standing behind her, just barely visible. A shadow, a figure, something I couldn't identify. It wasn't human. I stumbled back further, gasping for air. My eyes kept flicking back to the photograph. I could feel my pulse racing, the air thickening around me. What was happening to me? Why did this place feel like it was pulling me into something dark, something I didn't understand? The whispers were now unbearable. I could hear my name being called, but it wasn't my parents' voices. It was Emily's. "Please, help me." I turned, desperate to escape. But before I could leave the room, something grabbed me. A cold hand, ice-cold and trembling, clamped around my wrist. I screamed, yanking away, but the grip was too tight. I looked down and saw fingers, pale and skeletal, with nails like shards of glass. They were coming from the walls themselves, the fingers emerging from the cracks, twisting and contorting, reaching for me. I tried to scream again, but no sound came out. The house was alive. The walls, the shadows, the air, it was all alive, pulsing with energy, with something dark and ancient. The fingers tightened around my wrist, pulling me closer. I fought back, pulling with all my strength, but it was no use. They were everywhere, grabbing, clawing, pulling me toward them. I could feel the weight of everything, the years of silence, the years of secrets, the years of darkness that had been festering here, in this house, and in my family. My eyes went wide as I realized the truth, it wasn't just the house that was alive. It was my family. Vincent's letter. Emily's photo. Everything came crashing into place. This wasn't a house. This was a prison. And it was never meant to let anyone leave. That I stood in front of the door, gripping the handle tightly, my knuckles white with the effort. The house seemed alive now, vibrating with a dark energy that thrummed beneath my feet. The walls whispered, the voices rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. They wanted me to stay. Forever. The photograph in the box flashed in my mind, Emily's vacant eyes, the shadow behind her. I realized with a cold clarity that the house wasn't just haunted, it was a predator. It didn't just trap the past, it consumed it. My family hadn't just lived here, they had been devoured by this place, their lives twisted and distorted until they were unrecognizable. But why? Why now, after so many years, was the house waking up for me? Was it because I had returned? Or had I simply triggered something that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to strike? I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a storm. I could hear my name among them, distorted but unmistakable. Stay, they seemed to say. Stay with us. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to push the door open. The room beyond was different now. It was the same small space I had entered earlier, but the air was thick with a cloying smell, like rotting flowers and decay. The shadows on the walls weren't just shadows anymore, they were figures, moving, writhing, stretching their limbs as if trying to escape. I could see faces in the darkness, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. And in the center of the room was Emily. She stood motionless, her back to me, her hair matted and tangled. Her small frame seemed impossibly fragile, like a porcelain doll that could shatter at any moment. I wanted to call out to her, to ask her what was happening, but the words caught in my throat. Emily. I managed to whisper. She didn't move. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. Emily, it's me. It's your brother. She turned slowly, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wrong. They were black, endless voids that seemed to pull me in, swallowing me whole. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, a guttural, inhuman sound emerged. You shouldn't have come back, she said finally, her voice a rasping whisper that didn't match the shape of her mouth. It won't let you leave. What won't let me leave? I demanded, my voice shaking. What is this place? What's happening? Her head tilted to one side, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the sister I once knew. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by something cold and alien. It's not the house, she said. It's the thing inside it. It feeds on us. It always has. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Why are you still here? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you leave? Her lips twisted into something that might have been a smile, but it was empty, devoid of warmth. You don't leave, she said. It doesn't let you. Not really. The shadows on the walls surged forward, reaching for me with claw-like hands. I stumbled back, my body finally obeying my instinct to flee. But the room had changed, there was no door, no escape. The walls pulsed and shifted, closing in around me. Emily. I shouted, my voice breaking. Help me. But she was gone. The thing that wore her face was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I turned in every direction, searching for a way out. The shadows were everywhere now, their whispers deafening. I could feel their touch, cold and clammy, brushing against my skin. I thought of the letter again, don't let them forget. But forget what? What was I supposed to do? My foot caught on something, and I fell hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. When I looked down, I saw the box from before, its lid flung open. Inside was another photograph, this one of my parents. They were standing in front of the house, their expressions strained and anxious. But it wasn't them that caught my attention, it was the figure behind them. The shadow. The same shadow from Emily's photograph. It loomed over them, its form indistinct but menacing. Its presence was unmistakable, and I realized with a sinking feeling that it had always been there, lurking in the background, waiting. I reached for the photograph, my hands trembling. As soon as my fingers touched it, the room exploded with light. The shadows shrieked, recoiling as if burned, and I found myself back in the hallway, gasping for air. The door to the small room was gone, replaced by a blank wall. The box was gone too, and with it, the photographs. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They were louder now, more insistent. "Don't let them forget," they chanted. "Don't let them forget." I staggered to my feet, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? How could I stop this thing? And then it hit me, the attic. There was something in the attic. Something the house didn't want me to find. I ran up the stairs, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the empty house. The attic door loomed ahead, its edges lined with cobwebs. My hands shook as I reached for the pull cord, and I hesitated for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. "Don't let them forget," the whispers urged. I yanked the cord, and the attic ladder unfolded with a groan. The air that rushed down was cold and musty, carrying with it the scent of mildew and decay. I climbed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the top, I stopped, staring into the darkness. The attic was vast, stretching further than it should have, given the size of the house. And at the far end, barely visible in the faint light, was a single, glowing object. It was another box. The attic felt like another world entirely, disconnected from the rest of the house. The walls were bare wood, warped and cracked, and the air was so thick with dust that every breath scratched at my throat. Shadows moved erratically across the beams, though there was no discernible source of light. The whispers were louder here, nearly deafening, blending into a distorted cacophony of voices and cries. The glowing box at the far end of the attic was the only clear focal point, a faint amber light seeping from its edges. I couldn't tell if the glow was a trick of my eyes or something the house itself was generating, but I knew it was significant. It had to be. Whatever this house wanted, whatever it had been hiding, it was there. I forced myself to move forward, each step a monumental effort. The floorboards creaked and groaned under my weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they might give way at any moment, plunging me into the abyss below. As I drew closer, the glow from the box intensified, illuminating the space around it. I could see old, decaying furniture and forgotten relics of my family's past scattered haphazardly, as if someone had ransacked the attic long ago and left everything behind. When I reached the box, I hesitated. It looked identical to the one I'd found downstairs, weathered wood, simple construction, but there was something else, something more menacing about it. The light spilling from the cracks seemed alive, shifting and pulsing like a heartbeat. I knelt in front of it, my hands trembling as I reached for the lid. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, so loud now that I couldn't think, couldn't focus. I gritted my teeth and flung the lid open. The light burst out, blinding and searing, and I threw my hands up to shield my face. When it dimmed enough for me to see, I looked down and felt my stomach lurch. Inside the box was a book, ancient and bound in a leather so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. The edges of the pages were yellowed and brittle, and the cover was etched with symbols I didn't recognize. The air around the book felt charged, humming with a low, throbbing energy that made my skin crawl. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to turn around and flee. But I couldn't. I knew this was it. This was the answer. The thing the house had been guarding. The thing it had killed to protect. I reached into the box and lifted the book out. It was heavier than it looked, and the moment I touched it, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, more oppressive than the noise had been. I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes on me, watching, waiting. The book fell open in my hands, and the pages flipped as if moved by an invisible wind. They stopped on a page near the middle, and my breath caught in my throat. There, written in neat, cramped handwriting, was the name Emily. Below it were more names, my parents, my grandparents, names I didn't recognize but knew instinctively were part of my family line. They were all there, listed in a precise, unwavering script. And then, at the bottom of the page, I saw my own name. The ink was fresh, still glistening in the dim light. A chill ran down my spine, and I dropped the book, stumbling back. It landed with a thud, and the glowing light snuffed out. But the air around me felt heavier now, pressing down on me like a physical weight. "What does it mean?" I whispered, though there was no one to answer. The attic seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in, the shadows stretching toward me like grasping hands. I realized then what the book was. It wasn't just a record. It was a contract. A ledger of souls bound to this place, trapped here for eternity. And now, my name was in it. "No," I said aloud, shaking my head. "No, I won't let this happen." I grabbed the book from the floor, my resolve hardening. If the house wanted to keep me, it would have to fight for me. I wouldn't go quietly. I ran for the attic ladder, clutching the book tightly against my chest. The shadows surged after me, their shapes twisting and contorting, their whispers turning into shrieks. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. When I reached the bottom, I slammed the attic door shut and ran down the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. The house trembled around me, the walls shuddering as if in rage. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder, but I didn't stop. I burst into the living room, my mind racing. The book. It had to be destroyed. That was the only way to break the house's hold, to free myself, and my family, from its grasp. I threw the book onto the floor and grabbed the poker from the fireplace. The shadows circled me, their movements frenzied, their screams nearly drowning out my thoughts. I raised the poker above my head, ready to strike, when a voice cut through the chaos. "Don't." I froze. The voice was familiar, achingly so. I turned slowly, and there she was, Emily. Not the twisted version from the upstairs room, but the sister I remembered. She looked as she had in the photograph, her eyes wide and pleading. "Don't destroy it," she said. "You'll only make it stronger." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How do I stop this?" Her gaze flickered to the fireplace. "Burn the house," she said. "It's the only way." The weight of her words hit me like a blow, but I knew she was right. The house wasn't just a place, it was the source of the darkness, the thing that had corrupted and consumed us. Destroying the book wouldn't be enough. The house had to go. I nodded, my resolve firming. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll end this." Emily's form began to fade, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. I worked quickly, gathering fuel and dousing the house in gasoline. The shadows fought me every step of the way, but I didn't stop. When I was done, I stood in the front yard, the book in my hand. I lit the match. The flames roared to life, consuming the house in minutes. The shadows screamed, their forms writhing and dissolving in the heat. I stood there, watching as the fire devoured everything, until there was nothing left but ash. The whispers were gone. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace. The fire had burned through the house quickly, as though the building itself had been waiting for destruction. Flames reached skyward, twisting and writhing like living creatures, casting eerie shadows across the barren yard. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my body trembling from exhaustion and the weight of what I'd done. The book had burned too. I tossed it into the flames, watching as the old leather curled and blackened, its pages igniting one by one. For a moment, I thought I heard a scream, a high, keening wail that cut through the crackling of the fire. It wasn't human. It was deeper, darker, filled with an ancient malice that sent a shiver down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The house collapsed inward, the flames consuming the last remnants of its structure. All that was left was a smoldering pile of ash and rubble, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled of smoke and charred wood, and the silence that followed was absolute. I thought it was done. I thought I was free. But as I turned to leave, something stopped me. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was more like a sensation, a pressure at the back of my skull, a tingling at the edge of my awareness. I turned back to the ruins, my heart hammering in my chest. The firelight cast strange patterns on the ground, flickering and shifting as if something moved within the ashes. And then I saw it. A figure rose from the rubble, its form indistinct but undeniably present. It was made of smoke and shadow, its edges blurred and shifting, but its eyes burned with a piercing, otherworldly light. They locked onto me, and I felt a cold, sickening dread settle in the pit of my stomach. "You think this ends here?" the figure rasped, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You think fire can stop me?" I stumbled back, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. The house was gone. The book was gone. How could this thing still exist? "What are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure tilted its head, as if amused by the question. "I am what has always been. What your family brought here. What you awakened." "I destroyed the book," I said, my voice rising. "I destroyed the house. You're supposed to be gone." It laughed then, a deep, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "You burned the vessel," it said. "But the vessel is not the source. The source is within you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered, struggling to breathe. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "You carry it," the figure said, its eyes boring into mine. "You are the last of them. The last link in the chain. As long as you live, so do I." "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, that's not true. I won't let it be true." The figure stepped closer, its form solidifying with each step. "You have no choice," it said. "You cannot escape what you are." I backed away, my mind racing. I couldn't let this thing win. I couldn't let it use me to keep its hold on the world. But how could I fight it? How could I stop something that had lived for generations, feeding on my family, binding itself to us? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It feeds on fear, I thought. And I realized then that the only way to stop it was to refuse to fear it. With a final, defiant step forward, I whispered, "You don't control me anymore." And just like that, the darkness around me shattered.